Welcome to Entire Bible, where we do the entire Bible. Um, we are going to be continuing with this event, this series through May, and then throughout the month of June, I will be elsewhere, so we'll be taking a pause. We'll be restarting sort of early mid-July, and we'll pick up where we left off. So I think that leaves us 3 or 4 more sessions, so we're probably going to get through the Torah before that. Okay, so we are now in episode 14, and out of the first 5 books of the Bible, we've done 3 of them, and we got 2 more to go to get through the Torah. Um, Genesis was the origin story. Exodus is the action movie. Leviticus is sitting still and thinking about things, right? Mapping things out. So there was no movement in the book of Leviticus that we finished last time. It was all sitting at the mountain with God explaining how he wants things to be, right? And of course, within that, there was some pretty profound things like the greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, and what that means. Also, the idea of justice. It's developed the theme of the sabbatical and jubilee years and all that. There was some interesting stuff going on there. But now we got to get moving again. At commencement at Walsh, we had a speaker who made a point, says, the first 2 letters of God are go. So now they have to go. So the book of Numbers is basically them going. So they're halfway there. They've escaped Egypt. They're at the mountain. They want to get to their real estate that they've been promised, but they have to get there. What happens in this book? So why is it called Numbers, first of all? It sounds not a very interesting title. So it comes from this statement, which starts the beginning of the book, where God says to Moses, take a census, a numbering, literally, of the whole community by clans and ancestral houses, registering by name each male individually. Yes, it's a patriarchal society, but that's not why it's male. It's because this is a census, this is a registration for the military, for the draft. Because remember, there have been these anticipations, they're going to have to fight to get this land, so there's going to have to be a war. So they have to figure out how many soldiers they have. That's kind of the premise of this. But it also talks about how the community is organized on its journey. So it's like, so the census or the numbering is why it's called the Book of Numbers, at least in Latin. It's called, numeri in Latin, arithmoi in Greek. But anyway, that's where the name comes from. And actually, the first third of it is pretty boring. It's just numbering people. Guess what? We will do that in one slide and get through with it. Okay, so the middle part of the book is the road trip. And the other traditional title for this book is Bamidbar in Hebrew, in the wilderness. And it's because they're going through a wilderness, going through a desert to get to their land. And so this is the story of the departure and all the rebellions that take place, which we've seen some already in the book of Exodus, that make it a little longer than it should be. In fact, it ends up being 40 years. It's less than 100 miles, but it's a 40-year journey. We'll see why. And then and the reason 40 years actually is because the generation that is rebellious must die out by natural causes before they're allowed to enter the land. And so when you get to the end of that and most of that generation have died out, you need to have a new census because there's a new generation, right? That's kind of the logic of the book. Okay, so here's the one slide for that first 10 chapters. Basically, it's about describing the arrangement of the people on their caravan. And in the course of doing so, it kind of, defines different groups within the society. There are the Israelites, which is everyone who's not a priest. There are priests who run the tabernacle, and then there's a group called the Levites. Now, actually, we know where the term Levites come from. It's one of the 12 tribes, right? It's the tribe out of which Moses and his brother Aaron come, Aaron being the priest. And if you remember, that third book was called, sorry, I'm going to go back to that slide. That third book was called Leviticus, coming from the word Levi or Levites. And yet there are no Levites in that book, right? So it's kind of a misnomer. So Levi is the name of the tribe from which priests come, but the whole tribe of Levi are not priests in this version of things. If you remember the golden calf story in the book of Exodus, Moses says, "Whoever is with me on the right side, destroy all the idolaters," and all the Levites join him in this. And he says, "Because you've killed all the bad people, you get to be priests." So there's actually two different traditions in the Torah and throughout the Hebrew Bible. One in which actually there's three. There's a more primitive tradition in which anyone can offer a sacrifice. You don't need a priest to make a sacrifice. There's another tradition where the Levites are priests, and then there's a tradition here in which only priests are priests, meaning if only Aaron and his sons. So there's this kind of war going on in the background of different books in the Bible as to who gets to be a priest. This is one version of that. What's really interesting is not that people were disagreeing, because people always disagree about things, but that both worldviews were preserved in the tradition. So they didn't choose one over the other. They kept both of them in there, making it very confusing. But anyway, so we have priests and Levites and Israelites. More stuff, it kind of reiterates the stuff about ritual impurity and stuff in the book of Leviticus. And then it talks about how we're going to move the tent, right? The tabernacle. What's the procedure for taking down the tent and putting it up, and who has to be involved in that? So that's basically the first 10 chapters. Okay, this is the middle section that we're going to spend most of the time on. It intersperses events and commandments. We're not going to do the commandments because we've done most of them already. But if there's any rhyme or reason, if there's any themes in the events that take place on the journey, one might say that the main theme is leadership. Okay, so you have the blueprint, you have the constitution in the book of Leviticus. Who's gonna actually implement it? Who's gonna lead the community, and what characteristics will those leaders have? That's kind of the idea behind a lot of these stories. Now, of course, they have a leader. It's Moses, right? But what are his characteristics? We've seen some of them before, right, in the book of Exodus. There's some rain outside. Perfect timing. Hopefully it'll go away by the time we're done. So Moses was a leader, and we've seen characteristics of him, including arguing with God and winning. There are stories that explicitly focus on his leadership. And so he becomes kind of the ideal of the leader. And it has to be an ideal because he's not immortal, right? He's going to die eventually. And so question is, who's going to replace him? So that's another theme of this, is not just the characteristics of good leaders, but also a succession plan. Who's going to succeed them when they're not here? So there's stuff about Moses being a leader. And then there's this famous story in which they get to the borders of the land. They're finished with their journey, and then they say, let's go back to Egypt. It's probably the greatest anticlimax that you could imagine. Two books. They've gotten out of Egypt. We got our covenant. We get there, and now they say, let's go back. So that is what causes this this upstart generation, this rebellious generation. God says, I'm not going to let them in. We're going to let them die and get the next generation, try to get them to do it right. So this is really the turning point in the story. Then there's more stories that have to do with Aaron, Moses' brother, as a priest, and how he is a leader too. And then finally, we have the stories of the deaths of Moses' siblings. Miriam, right? She was the one who she's the reason Moses was alive at all, right? She saved him as a child. She was the one who with the tambourine and sort of led the great song of the sea after they were delivered from the Pharaoh. She was identified as a prophet. Moses is actually never called a prophet in any of the books we've looked at so far. He's a prophet in the book of Deuteronomy, but he's never called a prophet, although by popular acclamation, people talk about him as a prophet. But really, Miriam is the prophet. Aaron is the priest, and Moses is the whatever he is, right? So she dies. Aaron dies. Oh, okay. So suddenly the leaders are starting to die off. And then there's some kind of fun stuff about a talking animal. The other talking animal story in the Bible. What was the first one? That was the snake in the garden. Here's a donkey that talks. Not like in Shrek, but a donkey that talks. Okay. Anyway, then there's stuff that won't go into. Okay, so here's the first story. Scene 1. the spirit of Moses. This is a story about his leadership. Okay, so it begins, as things always do, with a complaint. I've said plenty of stories like this where the people are complaining about something. Initially, we're not told what they're complaining about. Later on, we'll find out. We're told that God is upset that they're complaining, and he starts to consume the he like incinerates the outskirts of the camp. So, yikes. The people cry out to Moses, and he prays to God, and the fire dies out. Thank you, Moses. But they have a problem. Their problem is one of diet. Now, it used to be the problem that we had no food, right? But that was solved, right, by the miraculous sprouted organic manna, right? So it's not that they don't have food to eat, but they're getting bored with it. They only eat manna every day, right? And they say, we back in Egypt, we got to eat all these vegetables and garlic too, but this manna doesn't really have much of a taste to it, right? So they want something more than manna. Okay, so what does Moses do? He complains to God. He says, speaking to God, he says, "Why do you treat me, your servant, so badly? Why are you so displeased with me that you burden me with all this people? Was it I who conceived all this people? Was it I who gave them birth that you tell me to carry them at my breast like a nurse carrying an infant to the land that you promised? Where can I get meat to give to this people?" I thought they wanted vegetables, but apparently they want meat too. Where can I get meat? They're crying to me, "Give us meat for food." I cannot carry this people by myself, for they are too heavy for me. Now, if you remember from the book of Exodus, that already happened. That observation, right, where father-in-law said, this is stupid. You can't do this all by yourself. You need to appoint people to help you. This is another tradition that makes the same point. But notice the way he sets it. He says, "I'd rather die at this point because I'm being burnt out." Now, do you think that's a good point for a leader to make? Burnout. You can't be a leader if you're burned out, right? So I think everyone who has been acquired some sort of responsibility for others, they also know they have to have responsibility for themselves, right? Because otherwise they can't lead. So the story begins with kind of a dual crisis. There's we want meat and vegetables, and I can't do this. So how does God respond? He says, "Why don't you assemble some elders, people that you know are good that you know are good leaders, basically, whom you know to be elders and authorities among the people. Bring them to the tent of meeting. When they're there, I will come down and talk to you. I will also take some of the spirit that is on you, and I'll confer it on them, that they may share the burden of the people with you. So then you won't have to do it by yourself." Okay, let's take a look at this. It's the same idea. He can't do it by himself. He needs helpers. But in the first story, um, where this happened, it was father-in-law that was advising him. There was not God wasn't a part of it at all. Now God is saying, you should do this. And apparently the way they're going to help him is God's going to give them some of the spirit that is on Moses. What does that mean though? What would it mean for God's spirit to be on someone? That's only happened once actually in all that we've covered. That was when God appointed an architect to build the tent for him. He says, "I put my spirit, a divine spirit on him so that he has the skill to build this tent." Um, Something similar is going on here, but what is this spirit? Later on, apparently it is the spirit of God, but it's also identified as the spirit of Moses. So what do you think the qualities of this spirit are? If the issue is how can I lead the people, then this is a spirit of leadership, right? So this raises the question, what is a spirit of leadership? What are the characteristics that make a good leader? Well, unlike that first place where he says, "I'm going to put my spirit on this architect and he's going to build me a tent," that was entirely unidirectional, right? We have no clue whether this guy that got this architect skills had any skills in architecture to begin with. But here he says, people that you know are good leaders. So notice that there is a divine, I will confer power upon them to be leaders, but only those that you actually know to have the traits. So here leadership is not something magical that people get, although maybe it's supported by this divine spirit. It's something they already have. And it's given to Moses to figure out what that is. So Now, why would he be good at this? Why would he be good at determining who should be a leader?
Been their leader the whole time.
He certainly has some experience, right? And not just the nice parts of it, but the downside, right? So presumably, if he realizes the problem is burnout and how you overcome that, and also the need to talk back sometimes, right? He already has characteristics that have been tried and true. He can identify those in others now, right? Okay, so he's going to do that. Brings the elders to the tent. A cloud comes over the tent, and we're told that taking some of the spirit that was on Moses, God bestowed it. He distributed among these elders. And then it said they all prophesied, but did not continue. Okay, prophesied is what a prophet does. Um, this thing about it not continuing. So prophet means they're sort of speaking on God's behalf or sort of making authoritative decisions, maybe. But by saying they didn't continue, it's not like they had this spirit and now it's gone. It's more like what happens when we try to access an important something on our through our phones. What do we get on our phones? Even like we're on a computer, we want to get to our bank account. What is sent to here? An authentication code. So this is sort of like it's a code saying that, yeah, they indeed have received this spirit, right? But the code, just because the code becomes obsolete doesn't mean that we no longer have access to the account, right? So I think that's what's going on here. It's sort of it's a public sign that yes, they have indeed been chosen by Moses and validated as leaders. So now we got leaders. Okay, but then there's a wrinkle. We're told that there were two people um, who were not with the others. We're not told why they weren't there. Uh, and yet we're told the Spirit came to rest on them also. They had been on the list. So apparently Moses wrote a list, but they had not gone to the tent where the others had been. So there's some sort of irregularity here. Notice, though, that the fact that they receive the Spirit, even though they're not where they're supposed to be, indicates that, again, this leadership thing isn't just a magical thing that, God makes them. Uh, they get the Spirit because Moses put them on the list, right? Okay. Then there's some people, well-meaning people who say, hey, there are these people who aren't following protocol, come stop them. And Moses says, are you jealous for my sake? If only all the people of Yahweh were prophets, if only Yahweh would bestow his spirit on them. That's the end of the story. What do you think that is telling us about Moses as leader here? I mean, it began with a logistical problem. I can't do this alone. What do you think his outburst here is all about? What is that telling us about his understanding of leadership?
They're just trying to help him.
And it's not something he has to hold on to, right? Their acquisition of this status is not diminishing him in any way. I mean, literally, he says, "I'm going to take some of your spirit and put it on them," but he doesn't feel like he's being diminished in the process.
He's delegating.
He's delegating, and he that is not a threat to him, right? Now, of course, there are different styles of leadership, right? For some leaders, you want to control, right? He doesn't want to control. He would rather not be in control at all, right? He said so. So does that make him a good leader in this case? Apparently it does. Okay, that's story number one. Next one, brother and sister, bro and sis. They are jealous of Moses. Now, notice the connection there. He just said, are you jealous for me? Everyone should be prophets. Now we get a story in which there is a jealousy of one prophet towards another. Okay, we're told that bro and sis speak against Moses because of the Cushite, the Ethiopian woman he had married, for he had in fact married an Ethiopian woman. They complained, is it through Moses alone that Yahweh has spoken? Has he not spoken through us also? And Yahweh heard this. What's going on here? First of all, who knew that Moses got married again? This story kind of pops out of nowhere. Later tradition will develop all sorts of legends about this marriage and how it was contracted and all this, but we're not really told here why they're upset at this. Yeah,
Did you say Miriam was the one that?
she's the sister who rescues Moses when he's an infant. Yeah,
Wow, so she's really old.
they're probably all getting on in years. Yeah, we're not told how old they are at this point.
Okay.
Okay, but we don't know why they're upset at this, and likely there is some tradition behind this that just didn't get into the text. But The fact that it's not explained probably means that that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is how they're reacting to Moses. Okay, now the question, has God spoken only through Moses? Well, no. That's obvious, right? God speaks through Aaron in the Exodus story. He speaks through Miriam in the Exodus story. So that they're just simply asserting by a question saying that, yeah, we too are prophets. So what's the logic of this? For whatever reason, they think that this is inappropriate that he has married this woman. And by claiming to be prophets, they're saying, well, we speak for God here, right? That's what prophets claim to do. Therefore, if we speak for God and if we say if this is inappropriate, it must be inappropriate. Okay, so context, we don't have the context, but let's move on here. God calls all three of them for a talking. He says, all three of you come to the tent. I'm going to talk to you. And then he says, you two, bro and sis, I need to talk to you. He says, listen. And then he gives them a poem about prophets. He says, if there are prophets among you, in visions I, God, reveal myself to them. In dreams I, God, speak to them, but not so with my servant Moses. Notice he didn't actually call Moses a prophet here. Throughout my house, Moses is worthy of trust. Face to face I speak to him, plainly and not in riddles. The likeness of Yahweh he beholds. Why then do you not fear to speak against my servant? There was something I missed here. Here it was. Right before this talking to it, there's a narrative. The narrator comments, by the way, Moses was the most humble person on earth. This, by the way, in early modern period was one argument for the idea that Moses didn't write this. So in the ancient world, traditionally, Moses is presented as the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, as well as being a character in it. That's actually not stated anywhere in these books, but it was an early idea. In the early modern period, they say, well, it couldn't have been written because if he was really that humble, he wouldn't have said it. Right? There's also the point that he writes about his own death. That would be pretty miraculous too. If you've ever seen Monty Python, the Holy Grail, remember the castle. He must have died while carving it. No. But anyway, so there are these. But let's focus here. So Moses is the most humble person on earth, and Miriam and Aaron are presented as fellow prophets who are criticizing him. So God says, why do you not fear to speak against him? Because he sees and understands me better than any other prophet does, including you, presumably. What I really find interesting, and we've seen this before, right? It speaks about this intimacy that Moses has with God. We learned about that in the book of Exodus. But what about this? The likeness of Yahweh he beholds. So prophets claim to speak for God, right? God wants this, God likes that, God hates that. How do they know that? Okay, well, according to this, sometimes they get these dream visions, right? But dreams can be interpreted in many ways, right? Often the way people interpret dreams is shaped by their own personality, right? But if Moses sees the likeness of Yahweh, if he clearly perceives and is not deluded by all these other subjective dimensions of interpretation, could that be related to his humility? In other words, does he see clearly because of his humility? Is that what's going on here? What is humility after all? Let's think about this. When we use the term, if that person's humble, what do we mean by that? And we use this in everyday language. What does it mean to be humble? Yeah.
Get out of my camera space wouldn't be very humble. One lady made that statement.
Yeah.
On, what I'm talking about.
Yes. Okay, so you set aside your ego. It's not about you, right?
Flow.
Right. It's not about you. And we've seen Moses do this before. He says, I know you're upset with the people, but please let them live. If not, then kill me instead, right? He's clearly not in it for himself, right? So humility, with the implication that ego can get in the way of what you do, right? Is Miriam and Aaron's criticism driven by ego, perhaps? We don't know, right? But they're presuming that because they're prophets, And if what they say goes, then Moses must be wrong about this. But God says, no, actually, he has a better insight into me. Possibly. Okay, well, at this point, things get a bit scary. We're told that God's wrath flares against them and he departs. And then he strikes Miriam with a scaly infection, right? That's that thing that's later called leprosy, but is not actually leprosy. Why she gets afflicted with this and not Aaron, since both of them were criticizing, we don't know. Maybe because he's a priest and he's not supposed to be ritually defiled or anything. But anyway, she gets hit by this. Okay, so again, it's not life-threatening. It just means you have to wait until you're clear of whatever the skin affliction is. The reason this got brought up in terms of how Moses responds, though, does Moses respond? See, she was wrong. No, he says, please heal her. So this is how he treats his critics. He says he's more concerned about the well-being of his critics than he is about his own ego here. That seems to be what's going on. So God says, well, she's going to still be unclean for a couple days, but then they'll be okay. Point is that this is how he responds. This is an illustration of his humility. He doesn't actually talk back to his critics. We don't know what that was all about. But we're told that somehow this humility allows him to see clearly, and also it is expressed through interceding for even his enemies in this case.
Almost sounds like a foretelling of Jesus in a way.
Or Jesus is just doing what Moses did. Another way to put it.
I think of Job, how he had to pray for his friends for him to have his captivity.
Interesting. Yeah. So anyway, the story seems to be about Moses, just like the previous one was. Okay. The rebellious generation. Another Moses story. Okay, they get to the edge of the land. Here's the land over there. Moses says, go out and check it out. He sends reconnaissance team out. Find out all the intelligence on the land. So they find out that the land is inhabited by people who look like they belong to the ancient version of the Hell's Angels. This includes the descendants of the Nephilim, so they're like, mighty warriors and all that. We don't really want to deal with these people, okay?
Giants.
Yeah, it's giants. It's like, we don't want to fight them. So they say, there's no way we can fight them. The Nephilim are too powerful. Let's appoint a chief and go back to Egypt. Okay, well, as I said, anticlimax here. But so it's kind of a slap in the face, right, to Yahweh. They already have a chief, right? They have God. So let's appoint a chief and go back. Okay, so as you can imagine, God is not going to react well. So he reacts exactly the way that he reacted when the golden calf thing came out. He says, how long will they spurn me? How long will they reject me? Move aside, and I will strike them down and disown them. I'll make a better nation out of you, Moses. They're clearly deficient material. Let's get rid of them. We'll start anew. We can clone you into a nation, right? And you're obviously the most humble man on earth, so you would be the perfect, nation. And just like in the previous story, Moses talks back. He says, no, if you do this, it's going to be a public relations disaster. The Egyptians will hear of it, and they will tell all the inhabitants of this land that we have to fight, they will tell them that you are impotent, basically. You cannot achieve anything. They will tell them Yahweh was not able to bring this people into the land, even though he swore to give it to them, because he slaughtered them in the wilderness. That's what they will say. Public relations disaster. So not only will you destroy them, but you will destroy your own credibility if you do this. This is the same argument he made before on the mountain. So he continues, and here's the change here. So on the mountain, all he could say is, don't do this because you swore an oath not to, and it would look bad if you did this. Here he gets to add in something. He adds in, be forbearing, be patient with this people, even as you have said. And then he quotes God verbatim the last time this happened, right? Where he had on the mountain, where he says, I'm going to make this right. And please, God, show me your glory. Tell me what you're all about. Let me put you on record as saying that you're like this. And he says, hey, you told us that you were slow to anger and abounding in kindness, that you were forgiving of iniquity and rebellion, even though you punish people. And so he says, so then act accordingly. Right? Act in accordance with your affidavit that you gave me. So notice, why was Moses so interested in getting God to go on record about this early? So he can now show it to God and say, you can't do this. This is, kind of repeating Moses's leadership talents here. It is a bit of a risk to him to say no, right? So he's humble. He realizes he can't do it all himself, so he's willing to share the burdens of leadership, and he's willing to put his own life on the line. 3 stories of Moses' leadership. God says, okay, I'll pardon them, but none of the people who rebelled this day are going to survive the wilderness. They're going to die off by natural causes. I'm not going to kill them. They're going to die off by natural causes, and then we'll go to the land. 40 years. Okay, so that's the first part of the book of Numbers. That's what basically leads, that's the premise that makes it such a long road trip movie. Now we get the other rebellion. We get 2 rebellions, actually, that have been sort of melded together into one story, even though they're separate. And I'll give you the separate versions of them. So again, rebellion not against God, but against, more specifically, Moses and Aaron as leaders. So we're still on the leadership theme. So we've seen Moses as leader. Now we're going to see challenges to leadership and how they react to it. Okay, the first one has to do with a group from the tribe of Reuben, who was the firstborn son of Israel. So maybe this has something to do with like status. We have the right of the firstborn. Who are you Levites, to do this to us? So we're told that 3 guys come up and they confront Moses. Moses says, "Okay, come on, let's talk about them." And they say, "No, we're not going to respond to you. We're not going to recognize you." And then here's their criticism. It's sort of a modulation of that complaint they've constantly had. You promised to bring us to this great land, but instead we're perishing in the wilderness. And now you're trying to lord it over us. You're trying to exercise some tyranny over us. Right? I guess they missed the part about the 70 elders. Far from bringing us, you've brought it, you're gouging our eyes out. This kind of potent image there. We're not going to listen to you anymore. Okay, so that's the challenge. How does he respond? He says, move away from these guys. Don't touch anything that is theirs. Otherwise, you'll be swept away because of them. So he's anticipating there's going to be some divine retribution against them. He says, move the rest of the community aside. So he isolates the complainers. And he then presents I'm not sure if this is a challenge or a test or something. He says, this is how you shall know that Yahweh sent me to do everything that I've done and that it wasn't my own devising. So if these men die an ordinary death, like every human being, then God has not sent me. But if Yahweh makes a chasm and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with everything belonging to them, then you'll know that I'm actually the leader. So I'm not sure how this fits in with the humility theme. But in any case, guess what? There's an earthquake, and they're all swallowed up by the earth. Okay. The other rebellion story has to do with the Levites, right? This is the tribe that the priest Aaron belongs to, and they want to be priests too. Maybe they said, well, back in Exodus, Moses, you told us we were all priests. But here we have a different version of it. So we're told that the Levites come and they turn the people against Moses and Aaron. So the first one was just about Moses. This is about both of them. It says, you go too far. The whole community, all of them are holy. Yahweh is in their midst. Why then do you set yourselves over Yahweh's assembly? So again, it's the same kind of lording it over theme, but it's cast specifically in priestly language, right? Priest is someone consecrated to a special kind of holiness. Why do you put yourself, why are you holier than thou? Right? That's the question. Okay. How does Moses respond? Well, again, he proposes a test. May Yahweh make known tomorrow morning who belongs to him and who is the Holy One and whom he will draw near to him. The one whom he chooses, he will have draw near to him. So somehow he's going to discriminate the true priest from the fake priest. But he says, we'll do this in a good priestly way. Everyone gets censers. Those are those sort of incense burners that are priestly paraphernalia. Everyone puts fire in them, place incense to them, and let's all approach the tabernacle and see what happens. Okay, well, what happened when Aaron's sons brought forth the wrong incense to the tabernacle? They got incinerated. So basically, he's going to say, let's see which priests survive this test, like an ordeal. But he's not going to leave that to chance. After saying, your crime is wanting to be priests when you're not, he then actually intervenes. He says, God, don't let them survive. I have not done anything wrong. Do not listen to them. So he's almost kind of trying to tilt the scales. Very different kind of Moses here. So they all come the next morning with their censers, and we're told the glory of Yahweh appeared to the entire community. And um, again, he says, "Please show us who are the real priests." And God says, "Stand aside, and I'll consume them at once." Again, there's this kind of divine threat, and we're told that everything around the fake priests is going to be incinerated, and they were incinerated, of course. Okay, so two stories about people rebelling against the status of Moses and or Aaron. This one's going to take a little longer, though, because immediately after this, we're going to have some developments. So remember, the test was bring an incense censer, right? So in this incineration, all the incense censers were melted, right? They were all molten. So we have to figure out what we're going to do with all those incense burners. Where God instructs Moses to tell Aaron's son to hammer all of these rebellious incense burners and hammer them onto the altar so that it will be a reminder to anyone about who gets to approach it. So in a sense, the sacred object of the altar now becomes sort of a reminder of who's a priest and who's not a priest. Okay, so far so good. But then rather than saying, glad that's over, no, the people accuse Moses and Aaron of killing the people. Well, you could argue maybe they had something to do with it, right? But anyway, the rebellion continues. Only now it's a bit more deadly because you've just had a resolution of who's a priest, and now the people aren't listening. And so Moses and Aaron say, quick, let's go to the tent and ask for God's help. But instead of helping, he says, I'm going to consume them all. Again, God is not being helpful at this point, right? The whole people are going to die because they're opposing Moses. So here again is one of those chances that Moses has to intercede, but he's not going to do it the same way he's done before, right? In the past, in the golden calf, and the one we just saw, he's one who says, don't do it, God, because if you do, you're gonna ungod yourself. This time, though, it's not just about him; it's about the priesthood. It's about it's about the whole system of sacred rites and such that is at stake here. And so he is going to nudge his brother to put his life on the line. Remember who this brother is. This is the brother who enabled and led the apostasy of the golden calf back in Exodus. He was the bad priest. And now he has been appointed the legitimate priest, and now he has to be where Moses was back then. He has to interpose himself to save the people. But notice he doesn't just decide it. Moses tells him what to do. Moses has some experience with this sort of thing, right? He says, take your censer, put fire in it, lay incense on it, bring it quickly to the community to make atonement for them, for wrath has come forth from Yahweh and the plague has begun. In other words, put yourself between the living and the dead. It's already begun, but you can stop it. Interpose your body between them with your ritual implement, right? So in other words, this is an intercession that will take place not through argumentation and words, but through ritual, which is how priests talk, is through ritual. Atonement, though. Remember, we had this 2 weeks ago, we learned about what atonement was. Atonement means you're decontaminating the surface, right? And you atone the altar, because when people do bad things, the altar is damaged, and you need to put blood on it to atone the altar, to cleanse it, to decontaminate it. So atonement always has to do with animal blood. There's no animal blood in the censer, though, is there? Incense is not animal blood. And yet he's saying, make atonement. So he's saying, you know what atonement is. You know how to de-escalate a situation ritually. I want you to improvise here. I want you to take everything you know about being a priest in the ritual realm, and I want you to apply it to this crisis, and I want you to solve it. Now, Moses also made atonement. right? Back in the golden calf story, in fact, there's the first reference to atonement in the Bible was not about a animal sacrifice. It was about Moses saying, please forgive them, but if not, then kill me instead. So atonement has this very specific kind of ritual meaning, but now the priest who is in charge of that ritual is told to use that ritual imagination to solve a problem that has nothing to do with ritual. Moses is trying to get Aaron to be a leader here. Person who was the opposite of leader back then now has to take on the role that Moses took on earlier. Okay, so we're told in this probably one of the most dramatic scenes in the Torah, at least. He took his censer, just as Moses suggested, ran in among the assembly of people while the plague had already begun, offered incense, made atonement for the people somehow, while standing there between the living and the dead. And so the scourge was checked. So he literally interposes himself, absorbs, as it were, the divine wrath and prevents the people from being destroyed. That's his atonement, right? That he has now become a leader, right? In other words, he now has sort of earned the position he has, right? That he certainly didn't have any right to claim earlier on because he was the traitor back then. Now, this is a story showing why he deserves this, because he's willing to do what Moses does. But it's still not quite over. They still need some proof here. So, God says, okay, now that he saved the day, because I didn't destroy him, he saved the day. I want you to take a staff representing each of the 12 tribes, and I want you to put all of them in the tent, in the tabernacle, and the staff of the man whom I will choose shall sprout. Right? It'll get leaves and stuff on it. Thus I will rid myself of the Israelites grumbling against you. Okay, so it's kind of a symbolic affirmation, just like when the verification code with the elders who prophesied. I'm going to verify it by making Aaron's staff sprout. Okay, so he puts them all in there, and it comes back the next day, and voila, Aaron's staff sprouted. He brings them all out to show the people, yeah, look, here's Aaron's name on it. So see, this has solved this problem. And he says, keep this staff in front of the covenant as a sign to the rebellious, not to grumble against you or me, right? So we have the sign of the plating on the altar, which was the Levites' rebellion, and then we have a sign of Aaron's staff showing out he's the priest. The people, however, are a bit worried at this point. They've been threatened with destruction how many times in the last chapter? So they're saying, how can we possibly even approach the tabernacle? We're going to die. So how are we going to solve it? So basically, God says, okay, I'm going to give you some rules. And the rules will be who gets to approach the tabernacle. And he basically says that different groups have different spheres of activity. He makes the big thing about no one who is not a priest can enter into the sanctuary. This is basically what it looks like here. So he says, from now on, if you're not a priest or a Levite, you get to stay outside the courtyard of the tent, which means that traditionally, remember, you have to, if you're going to make an offering, you have to offer it here in front of the tent. Well, how can you do that if you're not a priest? Someone has to help you bring your animal here, slaughter it, and then manipulate its blood. Who's going to do that, do you think? The Levites. So they get a place, a special role now. They're the ones who help facilitate what the people can no longer do because God's too angry with them, right? And the priests get to stay inside the tent, and no one else can go in there. It sort of marks their specialness for that. And so you have this rearrangement of ritual space that references status and identity and role within the community, which is also a question of leadership in a way, right? Okay. Okay, so the rebellions sort of define who is a priest. Now we come to one of the funnest stories in the whole Bible, the entire Bible. This is the story of Balaam's ass or donkey, right? Okay, so at this point, they've gotten back to the edge of the land. So here they are. This is the land on that side of the river. They're in the plains of Moab here. They're like on the east side of the Jordan River, looking at the land that they have been promised. And unfortunately, there's a king here who's going to try to stop them, sort of like another Pharaoh type character. Okay, so what does he do? The king is worried. His name is Balak. He's worried because there's so many of them, these Israelites. Wasn't that what the Pharaoh was worried about, that there were too many of them? He's in dread of them. This horde, he says, will devour everything around us. So he's worried not just that they have a large military, but they're going to eat up eat us out of house and home. I have to do something about these Israelites. So what is his plan? His plan is that he's going to send messengers to a man named Balaam. Balaam is a professional curser. He can curse people and make the curse effective. So there's this guy named Balaam who lived across the river. I want you to go there and tell him, come, curse this people for me, since they are stronger than I am. Perhaps I may be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land if you curse them, because whoever you bless, Balaam is blessed, and whoever you curse, Balaam is cursed. Where have we heard that expression? Whoever blesses you is blessed, whoever curses you is cursed. Heard that before? Like way back in Genesis? That was the promise to Abraham, right? God says, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Here we have a king who's going to use a person to do this to them in the negative, right? So he's going to try to override the entire story of blessing, right? Which was the kind of the meta narrative of all this. Okay, so we need to get rid of these people. Okay, so they go to this guy Balaam, and they say, please come with us. And he says, well, stay here overnight. I'll call up God and see what he wants me to do. At the nighttime, God speaks to him in a dream, right? Like he said, I'd speak to prophets in dreams. And he asks, who are these people? What do they want? He says, well, they want me to come and curse this people, Israel. He says, don't go with them. Don't curse this people, for they are blessed. Okay. So he sends them back. Go back. I can't do anything for you. So the messengers report to Balak that Balaam refused to come with us. Balak is not to be refused, though. He says, I'm going to send more people, even more distinguished than the others. We're going to ask him nicely again. Can you please come and curse this people? So they come back, say, please curse this people. We'll reward you well. We'll pay you well for this cursing. But he says, even if Balak gave me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything contrary to the command of Yahweh, my God. But you two stay here overnight, and I'll see, maybe we can manage something. God speaks him a dream, but he gives him a different answer each time. He says, if these men have come to summon you, go with them, but only on the condition that you do exactly as I tell you. Okay, so maybe God is playing a bit hard to get here, but he's going to let the guy go. So he saddles his donkey and gets ready to join them on the journey back to Moab. Immediately after this, seemingly forgetting what he just told him, we're told that God's anger flared up at him for going. I thought he just said go, right? But now he's angry with him for some reason. And so he sends an angel, a messenger, to take up a position on the road as his adversary. So here's a famous painting of the angel, and there's Balaam on his donkey. Adversary literally means in Hebrew it says as a Satan. So have you ever heard of the word Satan before? Satan, here's a Satan. Unlike later developed Jewish and Christian traditions, Satan is not an individual. Satan is just a role that various angels play in the Bible. But he gradually acquires a more distinct personality later on. But here, he's the angel of the Lord. Okay, so he's going to interpose himself. For some reason, God is angry that he's going. Okay, as Balaam was riding along on his donkey, accompanied by his servants, the donkey saw the angel of Yahweh standing in the road with a drawn sword. So the donkey turned off the road and went to the field, and Balaam beat the donkey to get her back onto the road. Do we remember any stories in which there was an angel with a flashing sword? What's that one? Our second creation story. Remember, the way that God keeps the humans out of the garden is with a kind of a Conan angel sword thing, right? Here you have an angel with a sword. We're going to see many elements of that second creation story being replayed here. Okay, so he says, get back on the road. Then the angel of Yahweh stood in a narrow lane between vineyards with a stone wall on each side. When the donkey saw the angel, she pressed against the wall, and since she squeezed Balaam's leg against the wall, he beat her again. Stupid donkey. Then the angel of Yahweh went ahead again and stood next to a passage so narrow that there was no room to move either to the right or to the left, so the donkey just sat down. Then Balaam's anger flared up, and he beat the donkey with his stick. Animal cruelty, right? Of course, you know. So here's the other thing. So as I said, there are two talking animals in the Bible. Creation story number 2 has a talking snake. This has a talking donkey. Yahweh opened the mouth of the donkey and said, "What have I done to you to beat me these 3 times?" Or maybe it's Eddie Murphy's voice. "What have you done to me?" And he says, apparently not surprised the donkey's talking to him. "You've acted willfully against me that if I only had a sword, I would kill you here and now. Uh, am I not your donkey on which you've always ridden until now? Have I been in the habit of treating you this way more?" No. Again, he still seems to be unfazed by the fact that the donkey's talking to him. So then the angel opens Balaam's eyes, just like it opened Balaam's mouth, so that he saw the angel standing on the road with a drawn sword. He knelt and bowed down to the ground. The angel then says, "Why have you beaten the donkey?" Basically, the donkey saved your life. I would have killed you otherwise. I am your adversary. So he says, "I've sinned. I don't know how, but I've sinned. I didn't know that you were there. Since it has displeased you, I'll go back home." I thought he said go, but apparently you don't want me to do it. The angel says, "Oh, no, 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 no. Go with the men, but just say what I tell you." Okay, so is this just sort of a reminder to him? It's like, don't say anything other than what we tell you. But it's a strange story, the talking donkey. So think about this. So in the first story with the talking animal talks on its own and causes problems. In this story, God opens the mouth of the talking animal and it saves his life. Okay, he goes through. Okay. Oh, by the way, also where are we here? Here we are. When the humans in the second creation story in the garden, when they ate the fruit, what happened to them?
Their eyes were open.
Their eyes were open. Guess what happened here? His eyes were open. Again, a parallel. Very intentional, probably. What it means is another question. Okay, they arrive. They arrive to Balak and his men. He says, "Didn't I summon you? Why didn't you come the first time?" He says, "Well, I've come to you after all. I won't tell you what happened on the way, but I've come. Whatever power I have to say anything, I can only speak what God puts in my mouth." Okay, we get that. So he sets him up on a mountaintop and has him sacrifice some things so that he can gain the favor of the gods. Wait, there's actually a inscription from what is modern day Jordan, called the Balaam inscription, where there's actually a reference, sort of a narrative about this guy Balaam, this seer. So apparently he was a local character known not only to the authors of the Bible but also to other neighboring peoples. Anyway, so he says, "Build me an altar with seven altars, and I'll try to gain the favor of the God here." Okay, so he makes altars. Okay, so then he says, "You stand over there at the burnt offering. I'm going to go talk to Yahweh and see what he lets me see." Okay, so then Balak, the king, says to God, "Oh, I've erected all these altars for you, and I've sacrificed bulls on them. Please, let's get rid of these Israelites." Then Yahweh put an utterance in Balaam's mouth. It says, "Go back to Balak, speak accordingly." Okay, so he's going to give his poem here. He's a poet too. He recites poetry. So what is the poem? He recounts that he was hired by Balaam to curse Israel, but he says, "How can I lay a curse on the one whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce the one whom Yahweh has not denounced?" So here we're kind of doing a callback to the "I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you" theme. "I see them from this mountain height I'm on, a people that lives apart, does not reckon itself among the nations, uh, has so many, it's so numerous, numerous as a dust cloud." Did we have a theme about Abraham having many descendants somewhere?
Like sand.
Yeah, the sands of the sea. That was God's promise to him. So again, we have all these callbacks to earlier things in the story. This is also interesting. "May I die the death of the just. May my end be like theirs." Well, apparently the just is the people he's looking at. And he's saying, "I'm not an Israelite, but I would like to be like them." He doesn't say, it doesn't say I want to be an Israelite. I can't. I'm a Balaam. But I would like to be like them. I like my destiny to be like theirs. This is the first time that a non-Israel, other than resident aliens in the book of Leviticus, a non-Israelite wanted to resemble in some way the status, the glory of this people here. Okay, anyway, he has not cursed them. And so the king says, I told you to curse them, but you blessed them. Which part of curse do you not understand? He says, I'm only doing what God says. He says, so Balak apparently is unfazed. Well, let's go to a different site, offer some more offerings, and see if he changes his mind. Well, he's changed his mind before, right? Okay, so he sets it up again. Again, so God says, go tell him this. So he recites another poem. So rise. He says, God is not a human being who speaks falsely, not a mortal who feels regret. Is God one to speak and not act, to decree and not bring it to pass? In other words, he's not going to change his mind, right? I was summoned to bless by God. I will bless. I cannot revoke it. I do not see misfortune in Jacob or misery in Israel. Yahweh, their God, is with them. Among them is the war cry of their king. It's capitalized in this translation because the king is God there. So again, it's anticipating this conflict that's going to unfold later. But it says, God's not going to revoke his blessing. In other words, there's no augury or divination against them. He says, okay. Again, okay. He says, neither bless them nor curse them. Just get rid of them for me. So again, a third. Good stories have threes, right? There's one thing, another thing, and another thing. So the third time, he says, okay. This time, he says, don't go away. Let's just do this together here. And it says he sees them, tribe by tribe. The Spirit of God comes upon him. He recites his poem. Notice how he describes himself. This is the oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle whose eye is true, the oracle of one who hears what God says. Then we have all these things about God. In rapture and with eyes unveiled, opened. So there's that opening of the eye theme. And here is the statement. So he describes Israel like a garden beside a river. Where was their garden beside a river? Eden. Okay, again, callback. So somehow that idealized form of existence that does not exist in reality, somehow this people is sort of like that. It's like it's somehow an amelioration of that. Okay, so it describes all this, and it anticipates various conflicts coming in the future. They'll devour these hostile nations rather than being devoured by them. And then at this point, the king's it's at the end of his wits. Look, I told you to curse them, you didn't curse them. I told you not to bless them, you blessed them. I told you neither to bless or curse them, you didn't do that either. So go home, I'm not going to pay you. He says, okay, I can't do anything else. Whatever God says, I'll do. So he leaves. But he says, I'm going to warn you about this people. I'm going to tell you something not about the present, but about the future. So just like at the end of the book of Genesis, where Jacob, the progenitor of Israel, has this sort of futuristic prediction of his descendants, so now we have Balaam giving a future for Israel. Okay, so again, he identifies himself as the one whose eyes are opened, who hears and sees. I see him, Israel, though not now. I observe him, though not near. So again, that's a poetic way of saying I'm looking into the future. A star shall advance from Jacob, and a scepter shall rise from Israel. Well, scepter means kingship, right? This star and scepter will crush the brows of Moab. That's the king that he was supposed to curse them for. The skull of the Sethites. So all of these neighbors who are going to be opposed to them, they will be defeated. By the way, this thing about a star and a scepter, this in later tradition, this was taken to be a messianic idea. Messianism does not yet exist in the Bible, but the idea of a future ideal ruler that will come about around the 1st century BC, and this will be one of the texts they'll look at. If you remember the story of Jesus, in one of the stories of his birth, how do people know where he's born? The star. That's where they're getting that. So that story is basically an elaboration on this poem here. But scepter, historically, this is going to be looking forward to the emergence of a king in Israel who's going to defeat their enemies, whose name will be David. That's later in the story. So this is sort of looking ahead, and it gives sort of warnings to each of these peoples. And then the story ends. Okay, so this is kind of the dramatic climax of the book of Numbers. They went through all these hardships, they rebelled, but they survived. And then this non-Israelite sees them and says, it's all going to be okay. Finally, though, is the succession planning question, right? What about these three leaders, right, who've led Israel as prophets, as servants, as priests in various capacities? We're told that when they were hanging around here, Miriam died. Okay, so she apparently dies of old age. She's probably the oldest, and she's buried. Okay, so Miriam, the prophet, is dead. They don't have a prophet anymore. At least they don't have her as a prophet. And then you have another complaint story immediately after that. Now, the complaint stories are very common, well known to us by now, but this is a complaint story that's going to lead to a greater disaster than normal. Normally, Moses and Aaron save the day. This time, they will be the problem. So same questions. Why do you bring us into this wilderness and all that? They go talk to God. God says, take your staff and hit a rock, and it will give you water, so people can eat and drink. Okay, so Moses takes the staff, magic stick, strikes the rock twice, and rock comes out in abundance, and the community has water to drink. Okay, so it seems like this would be a easy resolution to the story. This is what happens most of the time, but for some reason, God says, I didn't tell you to hit it twice. When did I say twice? And so you get this really weird response. God says to Moses, because you did not have confidence in me, because you struck the rock twice, and you didn't acknowledge my holiness, therefore you shall not lead this assembly to the land I've given them. Wow. Okay, this is odd for several reasons. First of all, because God is not forgiving here. Right? Every other crisis, Moses is able to negotiate a settlement that is not as severe as the original thing. But when he makes a mistake, there's no second chance. That's weird. This is the guy who's supposed to be intimate with God, who can influence God. He can't influence God to save himself, though. Really weird. Let's continue.
Question.
Go for it.
I always thought that, well, my own interpretation.
Okay, let's go back to it here.
Is that actually Moses didn't acknowledge God like he said.
Well, he doesn't mention God here for sure.
Right. And that he did it out of his own, like he could do it himself. He didn't need God to do it. That's kind of what I always got out of his own intuition.
Well, although he was instructed by God to do just that, wasn't he? I mean, well, again, the fact that you felt the need to interpret it suggests that this is something that is not obvious why it happens, right?
Okay.
It's not obvious. And again, because really, if we're reading this, we're thinking about it, we're just waiting for Moses to make a mistake. Of course, he finally made a mistake. No, this is strange. I mean, whatever is going on here, it's out of the ordinary. Nothing like this has ever happened before.
It's like his humility went away.
Out of character. We would have to say he was out of character here, probably. Yeah, and the weird thing is he doesn't get a second chance again. So anyway, he says, you're not going to do it. We're told that they come, so Miriam died here, they go to this mountain, and when they get there, we're told not only is Miriam has she already died, but guess what? Aaron is about to die too. Take him up onto the mountain with his son, strip Aaron of his priestly vestments and put them on his son. So we're going to do a succession there. So you're now losing your priest who just saved your life, right? The priest who saved the people from the disaster. He's going to die too. So they go up onto the mountain, they change his clothes, he dies. You still have a priest, obviously, but it's not the priest, right? It's his son. Okay, so there's a mourning period because, gosh, we lost Miriam, we lost Aaron. Moses isn't going to get to the other side of the river. This is disaster, right? I mean, in terms of the way we've always relied on them, right? They're always the reasons we survived, and now they're disappearing. So how is this going to be resolved? Okay, well, there's one other story about succession, and it has to do with The priest. Okay, so Aaron's son is named Eleazar. What did he do to become priest? He was born. There's no individual characteristic that we've been told that shows that he is worthy of this. It's an ascribed status rather than something he has achieved through any kind of particular virtue. He doesn't have a character arc like his father did, going from the rebel to the savior. He just gets it because he's his son. So there's going to be a story about another priest, his son, right? Aaron, Eleazar, and his son, that he will actually earn the priesthood. Like Moses and Aaron, he will become a servant leader. So there is, within all these stories, there is obviously this concern. First of all, that as we'll see, that Moses cannot really be replicated. You can't really clone him. And once he's gone, your whole experience will be different. But he has left all of these models of leadership that could be followed. Same question for Aaron. Okay, Aaron eventually ended up doing one good thing, and that could be a model, but his son, we don't know whether he has any of those characteristics. So what about the grandson? Okay, so we have another crisis story. This is the last crisis story. Okay, so they're still on the other side of the river waiting to go, but then we're told for some reason that people profane themselves by prostituting themselves with the local women. We're not sure what that means exactly, but it does involve worshiping the Moabite god, which of course would be a bad idea. It'd be like another golden. So this is another golden calf story. Yahweh's anger flares up against them, and they're in danger. What's the solution? Okay, well, here it's sort of the same golden calf thing. Whoever is doing this, get rid of them. And he says, take the leaders of the people, right? The leaders who you appointed earlier on, and have them be sort of the executioners of the traitors. Okay, so he says, yeah, just go kill the people who are doing this, to save the rest of us. And we're told then there is a further crisis. We're told at this point a certain Israelite came and brought a Midianite woman, that's like another ethnic group, to his kindred in the view of Moses and the whole Israelite community while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Okay, so why are they weeping? Because Aaron just died, right? The tent of meeting, right? That's where Aaron used to officiate. So now we have a non-priest who is going to take a non-Israelite into the tent. So again, in terms of the ritual map, not a good thing. So there's a crisis within a crisis. And we're told that Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw this. So here's a guy who is the son of the priest. He sees this. Instead of just saying, oh, hey, send the elders over there to take care of them, no, he rises up from the assembly, takes a spear in his hand, follows the Israelite into the tent, and he skewers them both in the tent. It's an act of violence, right? And thus the plague upon the Israelites was checked, but the dead from the plague were 24,000. He saved the whole people, but 24,000 people died, right? He saved them by skewering these two offenders, right? So think about this too. When we talk about priests, it's interesting that there's this stream of violence with priests. I remember Levi, the ancestor, when they tried to have a marriage deal with the local Canaanites, they went and massacred them all. And Jacob was like, "Why did you do this? You know, you're violent people." When Jacob described his son's characters, he says, "Levi is a violent man. May I never listen to him again." So the ancestor of the priests is this sort of, violent person. Then you have this descendant of the priests who was all, well, then you have the Levites, right, and the golden calf who end up, massacring the offenders. And now you have another guy who's doing the same thing. But like Aaron, he stands between the living and the dead, except not with a censer, but with a spear, right? So this very violent, visceral act saves the people. Again, this should be disturbing to us, but it's actually, Gandhi said this too. He said, Gandhi, the great advocate for nonviolence, he said, if there's a person running around a village with a machete killing people, the most nonviolent thing to do is to take that person down, right? Because you're saving the people from that uncontrollable source of violence. Well, that's kind of the vision that's envisioned here. When we were doing Leviticus last time, I said it's sort of like a terrorist with a nuclear bomb. Right? If the terrorist is flying to the World Trade Center, then the most nonviolent thing to do would have been to shoot the plane down if you knew about it. So this is sort of shooting the plane down. But the point is that he did something, right? He wasn't just the son of the priest, he did something. And God responds. He says, because he did this, he has turned my anger away from the people because he was jealous among them as I was. Announce therefore that I, God, hereby give him, Phineas, my covenant of peace. Again, the weird combination of violence and peace here, which shall be for him and his descendants after him an everlasting priesthood because of what he did. He made atonement. Again, this weird use of the term atonement, not for a ritual, but for an action that halts a plague. Right? So anyway, we now have, where does this leave us? Well, Aaron now has a successor who deserves the position because he saved the people. Moses is still alive, but he is going to die too, and he's not going to go to the land, so he's going to need a successor, and that's him, Joshua. So next time we're going to learn about Joshua, and actually we've seen him once or twice before. He saved the people as a general. He was an assistant to Moses during the golden calf situation. He was one of the only scout of the land who said, let's go do it, let's not run away. And we'll see that he's going to be bolstered as Moses' successor. Not that he is another Moses, but he is the best thing that you can get to that. So you have the succession of leadership by the end of the story. So that's a way of thinking about the book of Numbers. It's actually much of a mishmash of different things, but the core theme is the theme of leadership and how leaders respond to crisis, right? And we've seen that there are good examples of that and bad examples of that. Don't strike a rock twice, whatever you do. Thank you.
So, question.
Yeah.
Phineas takes the place of Eleazar.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, when his father dies, he probably does, right? So, but the point is that that Eleazar was simply a descendant. Phineas has an eternal covenant that will never end, right? Because of the one thing that he did, because he saved the people, he gets to his descendants get to be priests forever, right?
And he wasn't a relative of Aaron.
Oh yeah, he was his grandson.
Oh,
So it's the same. The lineage is the same, but now it's someone who deserves it because of something they've done, rather than simply being born. Okay, so yeah, and I hope you like the the talking donkey story. That's my favorite. Okay, so thank you, and next time we got to do Deuteronomy. All right.